Hello, my name is Jackson Kramp, and today we're here with the Student Broadcasting Club, and we have an extra special guest. We're not doing a broadcast of a game, but we are actually interviewing one of the greatest coaches in Lehigh history. He's the head coach of the Lehigh men's basketball team, Dr. Brett Reed. Coach Reed, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jackson. Thanks for being here, and let's talk a little hoops.
Yeah, so for the plan for this interview, we're just going to talk about the season as a whole, go over through it, and then try to get some of your more general thoughts on college basketball, as you're just one of the greats of the game. So I'd actually like to start by going back to last season. Obviously, a very disappointing loss for you guys in the Patriot League tournament against Lafayette. Things just didn't go your way. And I kind of hear two different things from coaches. They either turn those kinds of games into locker room material, they put it on the bulletin board, or they burn the tape. Which one was this for this situation?
Unfortunately, I'd probably say it was neither. You know, we didn't necessarily need locker room material going into the next season. I think everybody was disappointed that our run had ended, and it ended abruptly in the Patriot League quarterfinals. You know, and I also didn't want to burn the tape because there's a lot of things that you can learn from losses and try to figure out how can you do a better job the next time. I think our guys obviously stored it in their mind, and they were thinking about that game. They were really hungry to come out, you know, against Lafayette in future games this year. But, you know, I think it's probably somewhere in between where you got to take your lessons learned. You can't just forget about the experience. But also, you know, at some point it's like, you know, we're playing for things that are like Patriot League championship, goals, all that type of stuff that our guys have. It's not necessarily just about Lafayette.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I was there for one of those Lafayette games. Could definitely see the hunger in your team's eyes, everyone from the first years to the seniors. And I'll talk about those first years for a second there, because before I even came to Lehigh, I noticed you guys had signed quite an illustrious cast of first years with guys like Nasir Whitlock, Cam Gillis, Jake Pike, and Josh Ingram all coming in. Was really targeting the youth a focal point for you last offseason?
Well, recruiting is really important to us. It's kind of like the lifeblood of the program. We knew that we needed to bring in some younger players that could ultimately grow and blossom and contribute because, you know, even in our junior class, this year's junior class, we got 2,000-point scorers already. So, you know, developing some of these younger players so they can continue to grow and, you know, even take on more responsibility as they become upperclassmen is always very important. But, you know, along with that, you know, some of our guys that are playing a lot of minutes, I didn't think that was sustainable for a full season. So when we would go to the bench, we needed people who were talented and who were ready, and at times growing and learning, but guys who could ultimately contribute so we could win some of those minutes in their positional matchups when we went to the bench or you know, tried different combinations.
And would you say it was a banner year for Lehigh recruiting last offseason, or do you think that's the goal, that's the standard for Lehigh?
Yeah, I don't know if it was a banner year because we've had rookie of the years in the league. We've had multiple all, you know, rookie team guys. And, you know, we ultimately had guys who really kind of found the court because they just lived into some very simple principles of taking care of the basketball and not turning it over, playing really good defense and executing our defensive game plan. A lot of times younger players struggle in those areas. But these guys ended up getting a lot of responsibilities heaped upon their shoulders and playing a whole lot more simply because they were willing to do some of those simple things. And then, you know, obviously you got big-time games like Josh Ingram, who's scoring a lot when we're playing against Bucknell, and then Cam Gillis in our semifinal game against Boston University. And there's a number of times where Nasir Whitlock really gave us a huge punch. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily a banner year, but it's a consistent and steady focus that we have to try to get guys in who can help us and continue to grow their roles over the course of their career.
Yeah, that was definitely something I loved watching over the season, was seeing the first years kind of progress and seeing it. You know, you mentioned Nasir Whitlock off the bench. You could always tell that he was your go-to guy coming off the bench and give you that extra punch, that kind of microwave scorer. Now, another thing that we talked a lot about on the broadcast of the season was you guys were picked second in the preseason Patriot League poll. Is that something you try to pay attention to or just kind of block it out?
Well, I don't think it really affects anybody because they're just predictions and preseason stuff. But I also, you know, I don't shy away from those things. I think people recognize that our program could be really strong and have a very good year. I also kind of want that recognition for our student athletes. They work really hard to continue to grow their games and put themselves in a position where Lehigh can be in contention. And the truth of it be told, when we were healthy, we were really, really good. And sometimes you can't always control your health or injuries or things like that. But I don't shy away from those type of predictions in the preseason because I think it's a recognition that people kind of have respect for the Lehigh basketball program and what we built over the years. So sometimes you go into that preseason stuff, everyone's like, yeah, Lehigh's usually pretty good. They're usually pretty strong, so let's give them that preseason prediction that kind of matches.
And do you think those predictions matched what you expected going into the season, with the team as a whole expected to be one of the best teams in the Patriot League?
Yeah, I have those expectations for our team, and I'm always trying to be realistic. But I thought we had a good nucleus of some younger players who were returning, who showed that they could really kind of play, and then some returning guys that had some experience. I felt like when our team was in a hole, we actually were pretty strong and could really contribute at a pretty high level that is in that Patriot League championship contention, because that's kind of our goal, where we want to be year in and a year out. We knew Colgate, who was the preseason #1, would be really good, but I felt like Lehigh could be as well. And, it didn't necessarily shake down that way with the complete regular season standings, simply because of the volume of injuries that we had. We might have been the most injured team in the entire Patriot League, but sometimes those are the curveballs that you have, and I'm really proud of our guys that they continue to persevere and play with unity and commitment as they progressed to kind of try to match up to some of those preseason expectations.
Yeah, you guys definitely suffered a lot of those senior experienced player injuries, but as you said earlier, it was great to see the young guys step up as well. And moving into right at the start of the year, it was really obvious to see you guys played a really tough out-of-conference schedule. Teams like North Carolina, Penn State, Providence, and Boston College. UNC obviously was a 1 seed in the tournament. Providence might have been able to be in there. And I noticed a period where you lost to Penn State and Providence by 9 and 14 points. Pretty close games compared to what someone might have expected. And then you turned around and lost to St. Francis and UMBC. As someone who's coached for as long as you have and for as great as you have, how do you kind of reset your team's mentality after some very tough losses like that, where you're going to the best teams and you're losing a little bit closer than you expected, and then you're going to weaker teams and maybe not performing to the standard you're capable of?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the balancing act and why you use the non-conference portion of the schedule. I always look at it like this. When we're going into our non-conference play, my goal is to prepare our team for league play. The more we can do that, the better off we'll be. And there's lessons that are learned kind of through that process of November and December. So when we start hitting January, we figured ourselves out. Sometimes that's with coaching decisions of who we play and who we play a lot of and who we play less. Sometimes it's even tactical and strategic decisions that we end up ultimately making. And sometimes when you go against some of those really nationally renowned teams that are really strong and from power conferences, you want to test what you got, and it can be disappointing when you fall short. And then there's other times, and you kind of referenced the St. Francis game and even the UMBC game. Those things are great learning experiences too, because sometimes those can be really frustrating, but you can lose for different reasons. For instance, St. Francis, PA, we shot 4 for 21 from the three-point line, 19%. And offensively, I thought we got a lot of great quality shots, but we didn't convert. And, sometimes you got nights like that where it doesn't go through and you want your defense to kind of hold you through and see if you can pull out a win. But then you turn around and we had another game at UMBC where we gave up 92 points and they get into the free throw line 22 times. And our defense wasn't as strong there. So, I think in all these situations, sometimes it can be really disappointing to lose a game. But the most important thing for me is, what are we taking from those games? What are the lessons that we had learned? How can we form our identity moving forward? And how can we take, whether it's offensive woes or defensive things that we need to focus in on, tighten them up, so that way when we start heading into league play, we're not having a bunch of new experiences. We're actually looking back, we're learning, we're growing, and we're applying moving forward.
And so do you think you categorize as a coach those out-of-conference games and conference games as kind of a new start for the season when you head into Patriot League play, or do you try to get into the players' heads that we want to have this continual growth throughout the season?
Well, I look at the whole season as a little bit of a process. So it's not just whatever comes on the scoreboard. There is a process to it. And I think if you have that type of mindset mentality, you're always looking at all these opportunities as how do we grow? How do we take what we learned in wins and apply them so we're better? Take what we learned in losses and apply them so that way we can be better moving forward. So, to some degree, I think that process base is part of it. Now, I'm a competitor. I don't want to give up any of those games. It's not like we're just throwing them around to kind of have a little bit of a stew where we throw everything in and see what really cooks out really well. But, I'm also, I think, experienced enough to say, like, maybe we don't have to have everything figured out the first week in November, and we give guys a chance to play themselves into new roles and new responsibilities and new opportunities, and we try things out to try to figure out what's really going to stick with us and how are we going to be at our best. And a lot of times that's a formula that generally, over the course of my experiences here at Lehigh, have us playing some of our best basketball in the most meaningful time of the year as we prepare for tournament time.
Yeah, and you definitely saw that. I could definitely tell from watching the games that you had that clutch moments, those crunch time performances towards the latter end of the season. I'll pick up onto another theme that I noticed both following the team and watching the team was that you had a lot of close losses. I think we've counted 8 one-possession losses, and then there were a few more that were 5 or 6. And then usually in the broadcast, we formulated 2 ideas that you were telling your team. So I'll ask you which one it was, or maybe it was a mixture of both. Was this more evidence to your guys that you're better than your record shows, or was it more evidence that you really needed to get better in those clutch moments? Or again, maybe it was a mixture of both.
Yeah, I hate to ride the fence on you a little bit with this answer, but I think 2 things can be true at once. We do need to get better. We have close losses. We were one of the teams in the country that probably suffered or at least played in the closest margins, even nationally. I think at one point it was top 10. Maybe it finished that way nationally in those close competitive games. And a lot of those are great experiences that you can kind of file away and continue to improve. And if you drop those things, then it's one of those ideas that, like, yeah, we do need to get better. Because within that margin of 40 minutes, it's not always that last possession, it's the possessions that go into it. So that way we can build a little bit more of a cushion and maybe close out a game or knock down our free throws when we really need to, or get a key defensive rebound when it becomes really, really important. But then there's also that other part of, like, guys, believe in yourself, because as much as those losses hurt, there are some reasons that went into it. I mean, we're playing freshmen in a lot of those critical moments that never had those experiences. We're playing upperclassmen that had never been in those experiences or roles before. Somebody like Bert Chebar, he might have been a senior, but he wasn't really gaining a lot of those experiences. And then we even had a nucleus of guys who were kind of like sophomores, juniors, that hadn't necessarily had a lot of seasoning. Like Keith Higgins has been in some close games. Tyler Whitney-Sydney had been in some close games. But maybe they weren't the main guys that everyone was looking to carry them over the hump to win those things. So, when you're facing those difficult circumstances, and it can be really disappointing to lose some of those close games. I know I took them really personally as a coach, but I think it is an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We're not defined by these losses. And at times when we won a close game, we're not defined by those wins. It's what goes into each of those possessions that makes us better.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I see that kind of that coaching there, because at the end of the season, you would kind of flip the script and you won a lot of close games. Mm-hmm. Was there something specific you got through to the players, or maybe it was just this in totality of we got to do the whole game better, that you think did flip that script and said, no, we're going to beat Lafayette by 4 points. We're going to beat BU in the conference tournament. Was there something you noticed in your team?
Well, one of the most important things you could ever have is health. Mm-hmm. Think about it. A lot of the times when we were losing some of those close games, we're -2, maybe 3 players, or somebody's just coming back, or we're trying to integrate people into new roles and new responsibilities because now this guy's out, so somebody else has to step up and they've never done it before. Or we're integrating somebody back in that maybe is a little bit rusty, or we really got to watch their minutes. So, or you're just flat going into the game without some of the guys that you're really counting on. So when you have those twists, those turns, that lack of availability sometimes with injuries, being able to now have those guys available, have them healthy. There's no doubt, like Keith Higgins on the floor, Lehigh's probably a little bit better than when Keith Higgins is not available to Lehigh to be able to compete. And sometimes that's just the margin that you need in these ultra competitive, close college basketball games.
Yeah, Keith Higgins could definitely see that was a big loss in that kind of that mid-season little nebulous where you were transitioning from out-of-conference play to conference play. And you definitely, I could see in the box scores, not even having to go to the games, that there was a difference. But to me, at least, you did turn it around eventually. And there were two main points, that at least I noticed. So I'll start for the one I was there for. So it's February 10th, home game against Lafayette. You had a brilliant comeback, down double digits at halftime. You win 94-90 in double overtime. What did you say to the guys in the locker room, down double digits, to really get them going again?
Well, one of the biggest storylines of that game was Lafayette came out super hot. And, they threw almost a haymaker at us right away. And our guys got stunned. They took one on the chin, and we were down, and that was disappointing. We needed to be able to kind of charge forward and step forward with confidence and intensity. And they started to right the ship a little bit, even in the first half, where, I think we've been in some of those games with Lafayette, even harkening back to the year before in the tournament, where maybe they played really well and we allowed that emotion to ride their way too long before we were able to tighten it up. This year, particularly in that game at home against them, I thought we started to really settle in a little bit more. We got the key stops that we needed, and then even strategically, we started going to another round of attack, which was, if we're going to be in a fight, let's throw a lot of body blows. And by that I mean, let's get the ball inside, because we were struggling to score a little bit. We wanted to become more aggressive, tougher with our mindset, and even more physical. So then we had people like Bert Chebahar and Dominic Parolin that we were throwing the ball inside to. And they were scoring in the paint, drawing fouls, getting us to the free throw line, and allowing us to kind of almost reestablish ourselves. So as much as I messaged to them at halftime, which was an echoing of that message, it's really like, hey, we're going to take the game to these guys, and we're going to be a tough team, and that's what's going to be the difference to allow us to kind of gain control once again.
Yeah, and so I like how you mentioned that kind of idea of almost the staying composed, because one of the things that I noticed watching the game, and I think this was Keith Higgins' either first or second game back from his
First game back,
was there would seem to be a lot more of almost a hot hand riding during that game. Bert Chebahar, you mentioned, Dominic Parolin, and then Keith Higgins kind of in the later stages of the game, as you could tell he was still getting acclimated to 40 minutes of basketball, or actually more than 40 minutes of basketball. Was that intentional by you, to the hot hand riding, or you mentioned getting inside? Was it just kind of a result of that?
Yeah, throughout this year, we have some really talented and skillful perimeter players. But we didn't shoot the ball the way in which I expected us to all throughout the year. There were some high moments, but there was a lot of inconsistency with how well we converted. So if we had somebody going and somebody was making shots, we obviously wanted to continue to try to see if we could feed that hand and keep that rhythm and that momentum going. But sometimes it's just the tactical decisions to go inside, because in that Lafayette game in particular, we throw the ball inside, we score on the interior, Well, now all of a sudden that loosens up the perimeter, and some of those players, like a Keith, could get a lot of open looks, or even Dominic scored inside and just continued to score inside, and then he drifts out on the perimeter. And all of Lafayette's focus in that particular game started to become, how do we guard the paint? Well, if their focus is going to be on that defensively, it opens up some wide open looks for other people. So, I give that as much of credit to our guys to recognize when they were kind of feeling good and playing confident to shoot the ball in those moments. I give it back to the players once again to kind of like recognize where the advantage is on the floor, because if we have an advantage, we want them to have enough basketball IQ to get the ball to that advantage. And then, obviously we're going to make some tactical and strategic decisions so we can kind of figure out who's the guy that we can ride during these stretches of time to kind of make that point distribution work to our benefit. Because a lot of times, our team is not geared around a star system. It's not just one guy who's going to score for us. We generally have quite a bit of balance, and part of that is that understanding of who's hot, who's not, and who should get the ball in against our defensive matchup.
Yeah, and what I really appreciated during that game was how it never felt like you guys were coming back. And I know that may sound negative, but to me it was like, okay, they're down by 15. Now it's like 13-15 swing. Now it's 11-13. Now it's 9-11. Now it's, going down and going down. And then all of a sudden you were down by 3, and I was like, wait a second, they're going to win the game. Like, Lafayette had nothing after, maybe 10 minutes in the second half. And so thinking of that comeback and the atmosphere and the students, which is probably the greatest student section I've seen just my first year at Lehigh, but, you've obviously had so many accomplishments, but where does the double-digit, double overtime win over your rival play into the Coach Reed canon of victories?
Well, anytime you can beat Lafayette, that's kind of a cool thing, because it's just neat because you kind of have that rivalry. You get a chance to do it with students. They're engaged and involved. That's a lot of fun too, because that generates a little bit of momentum for our guys. They're feeding off the crowd and the energy that's there. It's great for the students to be able to take pride in us beating Lafayette. So, it was a good win. It's a double-edged sword a little bit for me, because I found ourselves being down, and at times that was a little frustrating because I felt like our team could have given a little bit more, so we didn't dig that hole. But there was a lot of satisfaction that these guys just continued to fight and just kind of chip away and keep doing what they're supposed to do, and do it at times in even an alternative way. So I won't rank it as one of the top wins, but it was a good win, and for all the reasons that I mentioned. And I think it also was important for our guys to be able to say, hey, you know what, we can win some of these close games, and we can have people step up and just kind of ride that momentum and the joy of being able to beat Lafayette in that game.
So, Coach Reed, there was another main turning point that I noticed, and I think both of us have kind of alluded to it. So it was around the same time that there were kind of long-term injuries to Jalen Sinclair, Keith Higgins, and then we saw Cam Gillis and Josh Ingram, both first years, come into the starting lineup, and then we also saw the switch with Dominic Parolin coming in for Bube Moa. Was that a premeditated decision at all, or was that completely due to injuries?
No, I think part of it is just reading the hand that you got. Like, who's going to be productive? Mm-hmm. I always would like to give the benefit of the doubt to our returning players, guys who have experience in our system, guys who know what we're trying to do, guys who are really, more potentially prepared than a first year coming in and playing. But as the season progresses and evolves, you're seeing all these different lineup combinations. And we're giving guys an opportunity to get their feet wet in college basketball, then gain a few more experiences within college basketball, and then figure out maybe this guy works better with that guy and which combinations are going to be the best. I kind of alluded to it before. It doesn't usually happen this way, but those freshmen, to some degree, they were playing more experienced and with a higher basketball IQ and with more discipline to our game plan than some of our returning guys. And if that's going to be the case, you're just going to, as a coach, kind of read what's in front of you and put the guys out there on the court that are going to end up following the game plan, playing with fundamentals, executing, and playing the right way. And it seemed like the more we played those guys, the more we got some positive results out there on the court. It wasn't necessarily what I intended to do, but if we've got guys who are going to show me, or a team that's going to show me certain personality traits, and those personality traits lend themselves to victory, I'm more apt to kind of play those cards, those players, that combination, or even that style as we develop our identity much more, because it's going to touch winning. And I think we went into the season thinking that we were going to score pretty easily. And, whether it's due to injuries or inconsistent shooting percentages, we started to have to morph into something that was about taking care of the basketball, playing really tight defense and doing all those type of things that make basketball teams successful. And, if our freshmen are going to do it, then let's play our freshmen a little bit more. And, I don't know if it's necessarily a cause and effect, but there was a correlation with us playing some of these other guys that seemed to kind of manifest itself into winning.
Yeah, and I guess this kind of blends into my next question, but was keeping that lineup, including the 2 freshmen, as well as Dom Perlin, was that only due to winning, or was there something more intangible? Maybe it's just as following the game plan idea, but was there anything else they brought, either in practice or in the games, that you noticed as this is why we need them on the court?
Well, the tangible evidence was the game performance. Mm-hmm. And then you're also looking at the breadcrumbs that they're leaving behind them as little hints. I mean, those are the guys who are getting extra work in practice. We're watching, and Josh Ingram and Cam and Nas and Burke are all the guys that seem to be getting extra shots up and doing extra work. Well, there's probably a reason why they're playing a little bit better, or even as they're being strong fundamentally and playing great defense. Those were some of the same guys that ended up having some big moments for us as the season progressed. So, part of it is that following the breadcrumbs of where the success is coming. And the other thing is I really struggled with this, and I'll be honest with you as a coach, integrating athletes back into the fold after they have been injured. Because do you really want to disrupt the momentum of a team? Because that becomes a challenge too. Because it's not as if those guys were just placeholders and we were winning, and then somebody else gets healthy and it's like, okay, well, let's diminish your role. Let's just anoint them back into it when our team's playing pretty well. So, that's a difficult challenge to be able to manage integrating new guys who have been injured that you expect a lot from, but you also don't want to hinder the growth, development, or the team performance for guys who are already out there on the floor, because you do want to be sensitive to, what are the team dynamics, and if it's working right now, you don't necessarily totally want to do a 90-degree turn into a different direction.
Yeah, I could definitely see that integrating, because I think kind of coming back from injury, I was like, okay, Keith Higgins isn't starting against Lafayette, but kind of by the end of the season, he'll come back. But, he kept coming up the bench, but the performances kept being there. And I think, I mentioned Nasir Whitlock doing this, but the 6th and I guess 7th man there, where you could really see that, where you guys would have the first, 10 minutes of the starting lineup. Usually not that. You obviously had a lot of rotation. And then bang, it was like, now Keith Higgins and Nasir Whitlock, who could be starting, are going and playing against guys who shouldn't be starting. And on that note of that kind of turnaround, I'll skip ahead a bit. And so you've picked up your pace, you've picked up your scoring ability and your defense, as you noted, and you've won 2 road conference tournament games, which is no easy feat, I'm sure, as you know. And you're heading up against Colgate, who I'm pretty sure about every ESPN talking head saw as the surefire favorite against your guys. What was your message to your team before that final game against Colgate?
I just felt like our team needed to go out there and let it rip. When you spend as much time as we spent in all the practices and all the preparation, yeah, there's some strategic adjustments that you can make because there's familiarity. That would have been the 3rd time we play them. But really, it just comes down to guys having confidence and comfort and trying to make plays. You're going against a good team that has experience. And I think that was one of the things that kind of lend itself to that particular game. Those guys look experienced in those moments. And to some degree, our guys, maybe a little bit younger or maybe not quite as seasoned in those moments, just didn't necessarily have that same level of confidence or that same aura about them. So one of my responsibilities as a coach is not to get in their way and actually encourage them and promote their confidence. So that way, when they do hit the floor, they know it's just trust your preparation, move forward, and you got to hope that even from a sports psychology standpoint, they're ready to just step into that.
Yeah, and I mean, regardless of that result of that game, I definitely felt very proud to be a Lehigh student that day because and this is a very specific memory for me. I remember I was on Twitter and I see a screenshot from rather large college basketball. I'm a producer and he says, "This team is 1 win away from the tournament." And it was a picture of your record. And I almost felt obliged to comment, "No, they're better than that. I've seen them play multiple times. They're so much better than that." And so regardless of that result, I just remember feeling like my team's 1 win away from the tournament and they could have been there. Like, I know everyone talks about how great Colgate was, and for good reason, of course, but you guys deserve to be there for sure. And we alluded to that Patriot League poll at the start of the year with Colgate first and you guys second. Do you think that over the course of the whole season, that sounds about right, that you two guys were the best in the league?
Yeah, I felt like as the season progressed, there were other teams that played really well. I wouldn't want to discount them by now just saying, yeah, okay, that's where we should have been. But my mindset was that's where we should have been kind of the whole way through. We just had to navigate a whole lot of curveballs, twists, turns, injuries, whatever it might be to kind of get to that moment. And to kind of your point, what do you got an opportunity to be proud of? Yeah, we were competing for the chance to go to the NCAA tournament, but the thing that you can really kind of be proud of is this is a group of guys that faced adversity. And, you're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds who are facing adversity. And it'd be really easy for them to kind of tuck their tail between their legs as soon as storms come. But no, they're pushing forward and they're doing it with an excellent level of commitment where that didn't waver to what they were trying to do and how they were looking to compete. They decided to do it together. They decided to accept each other even in new roles and new responsibilities. And anytime you get people who are growing and continue to thrive and evolve throughout the course of the year, that's something to be proud of. And then, obviously, you're sitting in the same classes as a lot of these guys. You're cracking your books and you're studying and you're staying up really late at night because getting good grades and building these skills that you're learning in the classroom are really important to you. And it's really kind of neat that these guys are doing the same thing and they're taking pride in their academics, taking pride in representing Lehigh and our student population, our student body, our university, even on some of these big stages of college basketball, and just pouring themselves into both of those arenas. And that's one thing to really be proud of.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the academics, because I do clearly remember there's a basketball player in my class, and it was the day of the Lafayette tournament game, and he was there, and I was like, wow. I almost didn't expect. I thought this was going to be like a whole team, like you got to stay together the whole day. But I was like, no, like that. Another thing to be proud of for Lehigh basketball was the commitment to academics, and our Dominic Parolin with a great academic season, in addition to what he did on the basketball court. And so I'll talk about the offseason a little bit. What kind of new recruits are we expecting to see, and what kind of roles do you see them playing in this next season?
Now, due to NCAA rules, I can't necessarily mention everybody because there's some steps that need to be taken before we can tell you about our entire class. So I'll reserve a little bit of talk about that. But, ultimately, with this incoming class, we're going to try to bring in a little bit of size. And I think one of the themes of the last class, kids who were freshmen this last year as first years, was a lot of perimeter play. And, obviously, with a limited number of resources, as far as scholarships, you want to balance out kind of the roster. And you got to have your perimeter-oriented guys. You got to have your interior guys. We have some guys that who are graduating for us that ended up playing and had some size. So now we're bringing in a little bit more size. And some of the expectations I have of those guys who are coming in as first years next year will be, can they rebound the ball? Can they play interior defense? Can they execute some of our coverages? Sometimes it's going to be hard to get a guy, especially as they're a little bit bigger, to necessarily transition immediately into college basketball, because generally one of my thoughts are perimeter-oriented guys can transition to college basketball a little bit quicker because of the size and the strength and the experience that's needed for a lot of the front court players. A lot of times it can take them a little bit longer to adjust, but we've got a pretty healthy dose of size and strength and skill coming in, where we talked about, kind of our ability to score and score consistently. Maybe some of these guys can kind of help that and they'll blend in really well with this group of perimeter-oriented guys and even some returning front court guys who just kind of grew through their experiences this year. Maybe as a first year now, it's no longer their first college basketball game and they're ready to take another step. Or you have guys like Keith and Tyler who now are seniors and now are going to play with a great deal of confidence. You throw in some young guys that are hungry, come from really good programs and are ready to go and kind of maybe make some of the same contributions that our first year players made this last year. Now you got the makings of pretty good balance across the board.
And I love that you mentioned the size because you are losing Dominic Parolin, Burke Chebuar, JT Tan, all three of which who have played very large roles throughout their Lehigh careers. And in a more general sense, what is it like recruiting at Lehigh with these very rigorous academic standards and maybe not the largest name recognition in the world?
Yeah, I think the brand of Lehigh does carry a lot of weight. I mean, kids are willing and families are willing to fly over a whole lot of other schools to come to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania and try to capture this Lehigh degree because we know what it means for our graduates and their future and how well they're prepared. So, you just got to be able to kind of find the right student athlete because Lehigh's not going to be for everybody. There's a lot of guys that just want to hoop and school is kind of secondary and maybe way down the list of their priorities. That's not really happening here. We get guys that identify with this place being a great academic institution, want to challenge themselves in the classroom, want to build the skills and want to be prepared for their future because they know, when they graduate, when they're going into their career after basketball, they're going to be well prepared and they're going to compete in boardrooms just like they did on courts and basketball arenas. And, identifying those people that really want that experience along with a great basketball experience becomes really important because it's selective. We've got to produce the right type of recruits, not only that like this type of experience, that want to buy into this type of experience, but can compete in the classroom with our other students that are brilliant and not bring the class down, where they actually add value to what everybody's trying to do. So when we find those people, we really put our focus on that, telling the complete story of the Lehigh experience, not sugarcoating the commitment that it takes for basketball as well, because they got to be really invested. They got to love the game. If they don't love the game, they can't just use academics to come here because they're not going to reach their potential and our team's not going to reach their potential. They got to really be bought in and want to excel and be the best version of themselves on the court, in the classroom, and as they develop as men for their lives.
Yeah, I think that just really hits what it means to be at Lehigh, and it's, obviously for your boys, it's the basketball and then academics together. But I think for everyone on campus, it's academics, but there's other stuff. There's always other stuff, and Lehigh students, they say it on the tours, but I think it's true. Lehigh students are some of the most involved people you'll see. They're overachievers in every good sense of the word in terms of the whole aspects of their life, and you see that growth. And I love that you talk about it for the basketball side of the world. Now, obviously college basketball has changed a lot, even since you've started coaching in the past 3 years. What are your thoughts on the transfer portal, on NIL, COVID years, everything in general that has changed recently?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most dynamic changes in all of the college landscape that's ever taken place. My dad was a coach. I know older coaches that have been in this business a long time, and even they talk about, we've never seen anything like this. You've got all these forces that have come in, from national forces of, COVID extra years of eligibility. You've got legislative changes like the transfer portal and immediate eligibility and what that has done now to create new opportunities for student athletes, but also some new challenges because some of the experience of college athletics is handling some challenges and some adversity and then continue to grow and take a step forward. There's new opportunities as well, like name, image, and likeness and compensation for student athletes. But there's discussions about them being employees. So this conversation is really deep, complex, very rich. You could talk about a lot of things. But there's no doubt that it's different. For me, I've always been an advocate of the student athletes, of them being able to, maximize that experience, I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, think about a Lehigh education that our Division I basketball players on our roster get a chance to take advantage of for free because we pay their tuition and their housing and all those type of things that go into this experience so they can represent us and compete on this Division I national stage. But then you have some of these other programs that they're making so much money, and some of those student athletes want that type of opportunity to be part of it. So, I think just like anything, there's some positives and negatives. It all depends on the person and their particular approach. As long as we stay with the educational mission that sports has always complemented for college, and those two things go hand in hand, then kids are bettering themselves and they're learning through their experiences. They're learning through, being challenged and coaching, and, they've got a growth mindset and they want to grow their games and their skills. And sometimes they know that, hey, there's going to be some challenges, but I'm going to push through it. I'm going to make the most of it. So it's a mixed bag because not everyone's approaching it with that type of idealistic sense of college athletics. But it really can be special as well when some of those student athletes can be rewarded for all their hard effort and energy.
And I think that's just a great point because I think the academics, for a lot of coaches, have taken that secondary role, and it's really disappointing to see because there are those really, really smart basketball players. I think we forget about them, and I think we forget all they're doing in the classroom and then also on the court. And I think there is a great deal of them that basketball is secondary, and it should be to their academics, but we just don't talk about them enough. And so I guess I'll ask you more as the coach of Lehigh men's basketball, do you think you're going to be able to use the transfer portal and use NIL effectively? Do you think it's going to be a help to you even this offseason and as you look into the future?
Well, I'd step into your statement there just a little bit, that there are a lot of coaches out there that really do value the education. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of student athletes that really value the education. But there's some of these student athletes that are maybe maneuvering through a system and maybe not applying themselves as much. And, the sad reality is in all these circumstances, you fast forward 10, 15 years from now, if those kids don't have the skills, whether it's the coaches that were the educators that should be pushing this model of being prepared so that way they can get a great career and have a leg up on the competition when basketball ends, or those student athletes that might not have quite the maturity to understand, like, hey, I really need to take hold of this because when basketball ends, I can transition to the next phase of my life and really advance. I think sometimes that's a two-way street, and I think it's a shared responsibility that all of us have to make sure that the game can be in the best spot possible. Because it's fun to cheer for great basketball or great athletes playing any sport across the board, but the reality is they're doing it at academic institutions, and that's where this place becomes really sweet for me, because that's what the Lehigh experience has been like. Ever since I've been here, it's always been about, providing value for these young people in their lives moving forward. Our professors invest into them. We got people who wake up early every morning and stay up late every night trying to figure out how to make the student experience of Lehigh the best that it possibly can be. And when we look at it in my personal role and my personal responsibility, I'm really proud to be part of Lehigh because this is a place that doesn't compromise their standards. They don't, find a shortcut to win. They want kids to be prepared. And, there's going to be guys out there, if it is the transfer portal, that just need a new situation and have really been invested academically and are really well prepared for the rigors of Lehigh. And they just need to be able to flip another page and maybe transition to something else. But for me, we do this intentionally with our student athletes when they're recruits coming on campus with their family, talking about a 4-year journey, a journey that gets them to get their degree. Because I'll be honest with you, there's plenty of days that our players probably would wake up and say, this isn't easy. This is a challenge, or I'm disappointed, or I didn't get enough shots, or I didn't play enough, or they get slapped in the face with a bad quiz grade because maybe they needed to study a little bit more or seek extra help or go to office hours. And if we don't have the long term in mind of what this experience is really like, about guys getting their degrees and being prepared for their future, then it's too easy to have people bolt into new experiences. Hey, let's go rent a player out of the transfer portal and mix and match some of the talent that we need as coaches. Or for players, hey, things are tough, let me go find greener grass someplace else. Really, it comes down to the commitment that we make to each other, the commitment to, with the understanding that it's not always easy, but it's really rich and true, that if you come here, you're going to be really prepared for your future. And that's what we lock into more than anything else. So will we never go and deal with the transfer portal? Well, that would probably be a foolish statement, because I would never want to close that door. But really, ours is a developmental model where we get young people in here, we help them grow, we help them develop, we help them take steps forward, and then hopefully we put them in a position to command and attain this Lehigh degree, which we all know makes a huge difference for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of response to the portal thoughts, and I think you nailed it on the head. And it's different for every school, it's different for every coach, different for every player, and it's about finding the right situation. And I think Lehigh is good for a very specific group, but when it's good for them, it's great for them. Mm-hmm. And so, as we look into the future, using that crystal ball, you've obviously accomplished so much here, and will be remembered very well. We're among some of the greats at Lehigh in the Hall of Fame right now. I look forward to when your name is added here. But is there anything more you see yourself wanting to achieve here at Lehigh?
Yeah, a lot more. Let's go win some more championships. Let's help kids develop. The good thing is I got a little bit of time perspective now. We get some of our former players that come back and visit, come back to campus, and they're telling me about their marriages, their families, and how they're doing as a father, their careers. Like, there's so much more to accomplish, because there's more of those kids that are going to come through this cycle of the Lehigh experience, and they're going to be more well prepared for their future. There's going to be more games that we can play, and more tournaments that we can win, and more opportunities. I'm as hungry and excited about tomorrow as I am about what we're doing today. And I just get the privilege and the honor and the opportunity to work with young people and help them grow. And I get to do it around something that I personally love, and that's the game of basketball. So, I'm fired up for every day that comes moving forward, and I think it's just a blessing and a great opportunity to invest into the lives of other people. And I think we get a chance to do something that's very, very uncommon, and that's that uncommon effort that tries to win championships and what's needed in order to promote excellence.
Well, that certainly fired me up, and I'll be definitely ready for more Lehigh basketball. I don't want to ask you too many questions about this, because I'm sure you've been asked about it a lot before, but obviously the moment most people think of when they think of Lehigh is you guys beating Duke, and for good reason, right? This is, for me, it's a seminal moment in my life in terms of Lehigh beating Duke and the great Giants falling. But one of my favorite moments is right at the end of the game. You and Coach K go and you shake hands as coaches would, and you have a little bit of a longer handshake than usual, and you guys say something to each other. Can I ask you, what did you guys say there? Because I've always just wondered so greatly.
Yeah, that moment of beating Duke was a pretty monumental one for Lehigh. Going down in kind of the record books as one of the top upsets in all of NCAA history is a really special experience. To be able to do it in Greensboro, a place where I lived for a couple of years, was cool, where I have family, friends, all that type of stuff there. And then doing it against one of the most renowned programs in the history of college basketball, against one of the most renowned coaches and figures in Coach K. I mean, that was really significant. And it was really something that, as a competitor, you kind of don't want to be too much in awe of who you're competing against, because that's the beauty of the NCAA tournament. You tip it up, and we go at it, and at the end of that 40 minutes, anything can happen. It's not a 7-game series like the NBA. We've got that moment. So we're going into it as competitors, as equals, as an opportunity to show what we've got. And I know our guys were hungry for it. But in those closing moments, and even before the game totally ended, there's a sense of humility that I had as well, being on that stage and having what it was a great blessing, a great gift to be able to compete on that particular night. And instead of going up there and asking Coach K to say something to me, this is one of the greats of all college sports. Instead of having him have to say something to me, I actually stepped into that moment. And I shook his hand, and I said it was an honor to be able to compete against you and a program that you have built that is one of the premier programs in all of college basketball. And I'm pleased to be able to have been able to compete, and the way in which you've brought so much honor to the game of basketball is noteworthy. And I think that kind of put him back a small step, because as much as I was competitive and I wanted to pump my fist and say, let's go, we did it, there was that sense of giving respect to our opponent, showing that type of sportsmanship, and recognizing everything that went into that moment for him, for Duke, and also to some degree it's a mirror that reflects back to us and what we were able to accomplish, because I was sincere about what I said.
That definitely was not what I expected, but it completely fills what I've wanted to know for so many years, because everyone else looks at that moment and they think they know the story, and so I've always been able to keep it a little bit closer to my chest and been like, well, I know Lehigh, I've met Coach Reed before, but getting to know that you stepped in that moment, I think that's perfectly on brand. Not showing up the great Coach K, but meeting him like that is just great for me, great to know. But I guess I'll ask another question about Coach K. Is that do you ever run into him now and again, even though he's retired? You ever run into him since? Is it a little bit awkward, a little bit of tension there? Knowing you beat him and you beat his great team.
No, he's actually handled it very, very well. He's now retired and is no longer out on the road recruiting, but that's one of the principal ways that I'd see him. We'd be at an event watching, maybe not the same player, but maybe the same team. And, we'd run into each other, and he was always gracious every step of the way to say hi and, to really be friendly. Because, you could be pretty grumbly about something like that. That's not one of the pinnacle moments probably of his entire career when you consider the national championships that he coached in. But nonetheless, he always stepped into it in a very positive way. And, we'd see each other and exchange pleasantries. So I think maybe the humility that I showed also matched the humility that I think he would have. It was just two competitors on one particular night going at it, but there's a mutual amount of respect for each other as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also matches what I kind of expected Coach K to be like, in terms of that. He's a great, and not just in terms of a basketball coach, but as a human being and as a competitor. And I loved what you said earlier about the equalizing nature of the tournament. And I remember I read this book, and part of it was about Coach K. And I was a little upset when they mentioned Lehigh. Just like, oh, and then they were upset by this team from Bethlehem, and I was like, no, talk about it more. Like, we won. Like, yep. Bring it up more. Like, I don't care what they did in 1986. I want to know about C.J. McCollum and them. And I'll ask a quick question about C.J. because one of my favorite articles is something he actually wrote, where he describes how he thought you would win the second round as well.
I did too.
Yeah, and go to the Sweet 16, and he writes down how he tells all his neighbors this. And you mentioned past players coming back to the program. Do you envision that with CJ when his playing days are eventually over? Do you think he's going to come back to the Lehigh and kind of pass on some of that experience and wisdom?
Well, he already is. That guy's been really generous with his time, with his attention. It was crazy. They just played in the first round last night. And, I sent him just a text a little bit right before the game, just saying, hey, good luck. So glad you get to do what you love. And, it was like 15 minutes before the game. He must have had a shooting workout and then got back into the library. Or, excuse me, he had a shooting workout and then went back into the locker room. He actually texted me back probably like 10 minutes before tip time. And I'm like, oh, that's crazy. But that's just the kind of guy he is. Like, he's been on campus, and the schools recognize him. He's been a commencement speaker. He's now in this Hall of Fame, which is really important. His number has been honored in Stabler Arena. But he's come back a lot of other times and even talked to our guys or wanted to catch a quick workout before he went back to Portland or New Orleans. And, it's just, he's been engaged, and I think Lehigh is a little bit of his fabric. I think the things that he learned, the things that how he grew is part of the reason why he's the president of the Players Association and, just such a well-respected pro. I mean, he's a great basketball player. He developed while he was here. He brought in a lot of things to the table as a really talented player. But you know what? He brought a lot of things into the classroom, a lot of things into a journalism major, but he grew in those experiences now as well. And now, just look at what he's doing across the board. Seems like everything he touches seems to have a little bit of a feel of like Lehigh as well, with excellence and with class.
Yeah, and I love how you bring up the president of the Players Association. I remember thinking that was super cool. And it connects back to what you said earlier about Lehigh players going on to be board members and dominating in that field, because he's dominating in two things. He's on the court, and he's also, I guess it's a boardroom as the president of the Players Association. And I love how you mentioned bringing the Lehigh and the journalism major, because I've read some of the things he wrote, and I'm like, yeah, he went to Lehigh. I can see that in his writing, and I know I bet if you gave it to some of the other players, maybe they're not like that, but you went to Lehigh. And it's great to see him as a hero of mine, even though I didn't play basketball just growing up in the area. It's great to see that represented on the national stage. I was hoping we were going to get to see him in the Olympic roster, maybe getting on the international stage. But I'll ask just one more question. As you look into next season and maybe a little bit in the future, what can we expect from Lehigh? Your boys, the men's basketball team, coming out next season. What are the highlights? What should we be keeping notice? What should we be talking about in the broadcast as we head to next year?
Yeah, I think this year we kind of revamped our offense to be a little bit more free-flowing, a little less stagnant. There's a lot of screening even off the ball, which is a little counter-cultural in college basketball. And our guys had to learn, adapt, and grow. And I think as the year went on, they became a little bit more adept at making the right type of reads. I'd say we will see what we were doing, but hopefully doing it at a higher level, where there's even better reads and more sharing of the basketball and higher percentage shots. And, hopefully our guys, as they get more comfortable, confident, familiar with that offense, they really start to evolve and become much more efficient and effective with what they do. Because we generally always are going to play with a reasonable pace where we're going to be opportunistic. And that's a fun brand of basketball to watch when you got 5 guys out there that are sharing it, being aggressive, attacking in transition, sharing the ball and getting each other open. Those are some wonderful plays. And then defensively, I think, 2 years ago, we were number 1 in the conference in field goal percentage defense. This last year, our steal rate kind of went up, and we were a little bit more opportunistic and a little bit more aggressive. Depending on how our roster continues to form and how some of these younger guys mold into what we're doing, I think it's just another kind of exciting brand of basketball, because you're going to have an opportunistic, higher tempo type of team that shares the basketball. Now you kind of put that idea, that grit, toughness, a little bit of what this town, this community of being forged in Bethlehem Steel is about. And there are 5 guys that were out there doing it together, having each other's back. It's just kind of like fun to watch for me as a little bit more of a basketball purist, and hopefully everybody else enjoys watching that as well.
Well, I can safely say I enjoyed watching your team play. All the games I went to were great contests, and they were just great players. And so I think that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Coach Reed one more time. He's been excellent with us today. I hope we can make a tradition out of this.
This was fun. This was a good experience.
And I hope we get to see you another time. If not, I can say for certain we're going to be there at Stabler when you guys tip off next year. And I think I can safely say for our whole club and all of Lehigh University, we're very excited to see what you and your team do next. So thank you, and thank you for everyone for watching.
Thank you.